Good evening, y'all. How you doing? Hope you had a good day. Mine was quite busy. Um, but that's a good thing. I like it when it's busy. Um, yeah, I'm just getting ready to uh chill out, take my nighttime meds and go to bed. So I figured I would continue my story from last night. Last night I talked about my last husband and I up until 2015. And tonight I'm going to be talking about one of the incidents that almost broke me. So I was in my second semester of college. I had a full class load. All my classes were online, so I was able to take care of everything from home without having to go to campus. And I mean, I was kicking ass. I was getting it done. I was, still pulling straight A's. And Tim was also in his second semester for his pharmacy tech. Um, at the time, I I still had some teeth in my mouth, but a lot of them were broken and jagged, and they were causing me a lot of pain. So, I had made an appointment with my dad's dentist to see about getting everything taken out and getting dentures or, possibly implants. So I had gotten the appointment set up, and it was supposed to be for the 31st of March. And I was very far ahead in all of my classes, so um, taking the day off to go deal with that was no big deal. I didn't have my license because I'd given it up years ago because of all the medication I was on. I hadn't gotten it back yet. So Dad was going to drive me, and we were supposed to leave here at 9 in the morning. And my grandmother's house that I was in and that I was in with my husband, and my dad's house, which is the house I'm in now, there's only 2.5 telephone poles between them. So we can see, the houses out each other's windows. And, I was ready to go at, a little bit before 9. And I was just, waiting on Dad. And 9 o'clock comes around, and, I look out and vehicle's still there. Lights aren't on. He wasn't on his way yet. So, I was like, well, maybe he's having bathroom issues, which, you know, everybody has them now and then. So I just waited a little bit. Um, and then by 10 after 9, I still hadn't heard from him, and he wasn't on his way up to get me. So I decided to just walk on down here. That way, when he was ready to leave, we could just leave from here and he wouldn't have to come up and get me. So I, walked on down and get up on the back porch, and I go to open the back door. and I couldn't. So I tried to open it again, and I heard a groan, and I start freaking. So I ran around the front of the house and came in the front door and came through to the stove room, and there was Daddy laying on the ground, his head up against the door at a very weird angle, his body, you know, at a different angle than his neck, and his legs at an even more different angle. And he was up against the door. So I immediately called 911 to get the rescue squad on their way. Tim was working at the college bookstore at the time, so I was trying to get hold of him, all the while talking to Dad to try and find out what happened. This was about 9:15, and he told me that at about 5:30, he got up, like he always did, to let his kitty cat outside to use the bathroom because she was an indoor-outdoor cat. It's something he'd done every day for 30 years with their cats. And as he was coming back in the house, he took a step up on the one step to come from the storeroom into the house and fell. And that's when he told me he was paralyzed. And I was just saying, no, 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 you can't, you're not, you can't be, you're not, you're fine. So that was a long wait for the ambulance to get there. It's normally about a 10 to 15 minute trip to get them here. Now it's normally a half-hour trip to get from Wytheville to our house. I had finally reached him and told him what had happened, and he actually got here in like 10 minutes and was pulling in right behind the rescue squad. Once before the squad got there, because Dad was at such a bad angle, I wanted to try and straighten him up, but I couldn't. He was not a fat person by any means, but he was solid. And I couldn't budge him as much as I tried. So while the rescue squad came through and started doing what they needed to, I was trying to explain to Tim what had happened, and I was sobbing even worse than I am now. And I was just a wreck and could barely even speak. And instead of being comforting, he snapped at me and told me to stop crying, stop gasping, and tell him what happened. And unfortunately, that's the way he reacted to a lot of times, where I would need emotional support, and he would act very indifferent and almost cold. So I finally let him know what was going on, what had happened. And I had also let the rescue squad know what happened. Now, it was the last day of March, and it was still cold. And he had been laying there for almost 4 hours. So he was almost deathly hypothermic. So the rescue squad gets him loaded up, and they start heading out to Wytheville, to the community hospital. And Tim and I follow. And I was already blaming myself for his fall. I had moved back out here because that was the one thing I was afraid of would happen. And I was here for 5 years, but it happened. And I knew if he was paralyzed, his life was going to change so much. And Daddy was a very strong person. He never was one to sit back and do nothing. He was always busy with housework, with yard work, with gardening, with his bees. And I knew if he had broken his neck and was paralyzed, that he would never be the same again. And I was blaming myself for not finding him sooner, for not realizing he was in trouble. I consider myself to be a spiritual person, and I felt I should have known he was in distress, even though realistically, we don't know these things. So, from that point on, my guilt was deeply embedded in my mind. And nothing I could say or do, nothing the doctors said or did, made it any better. We all got to the hospital, and the emergency room doctor told us that Dad was in grave condition because his vital signs and body temperature were so low that they weren't even sure he was going to survive it. And that's when they said that, yes, he broke his neck and he was paralyzed. And, Daddy had quite a few back surgeries. So I told the ER doctor who his surgeon was, and they contacted him and then arranged for the helicopter to fly Dad from here to Lewis Gale Hospital in Salem. So once they got Daddy loaded on there, Tim and I came home, and I came to Dad's house, and I packed things that I thought he might need. I was trying to be optimistic, but I, got his stuff packed, and then I went and I packed what I would need because there was no way in hell I was going to leave his side for any reason. So after I get everything I need, then Tim and I start driving to Roanoke, and it's about an hour and a half trip to get there. So during that time, I called everybody that needed to know, my brother, my dad's sister, my boys, you know, friends and family that needed to know. So I spent that trip talking to everybody and letting people know where we were going to be and what had happened and the prognosis at that point that I had been told. So we get to Salem, and he is, admitted to the ICU because his condition was still grave. His back doctor was already there and told me that they needed to go in and do surgery, but because Dad's vitals were so bad and he was still hypothermic, that they couldn't do it until he was stabilized, and that with a little bit of luck, they could get him stabilized over the next 24 hours and then be able to do the surgery. So I, camped in his room, stayed by his side, you know. It fell to me to do all the paperwork to get everything arranged. And luckily, he did stabilize on the afternoon of the 1st. So at 8 o'clock that night, his doctor started performing the surgery on him. They started at 8 o'clock, and they didn't finish until after 2 o'clock in the morning. They had to put metal in the front of his neck and in the back. After the doctor was finished, he came and talked to me, and I told him my fear that if I had found Daddy sooner, then it wouldn't be like it was. And he told me point blank that the damage was done instantaneous. When he fell, it whiplashed his neck and broke it. And even if I had found him 2 minutes after it happened, the outcome would not have changed. But I was still blaming myself. And that was 6 years ago, and up until recently, I have been punishing myself the entire time because of it, and more. So, they get his surgery done, and, he starts recuperating. All the family had come in. One of my sons let me go to a hotel for a night while they stayed and looked after Daddy, and I was able to get a little bit of sleep. But at that time, every time I closed my eyes to go to sleep, I kept having nightmares about what had happened and nightmares about Daddy dying. And it was very hard to try and get any sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, it was torture. And then I'd wake up and reality would hit and it'd be just as bad. And after the surgery, they were able to do more testing, and he had some movement in his upper body. He could move his arms, but he could not move his hands. And on the 4th day after his surgery, he did not have strength to cough because he was paralyzed. So fluid kept building at the bottom of his lungs. And they would have to do a bronchoscopy to get all that mucus out of there so he would not be continuously fighting pneumonia. But because of where the metal was in his neck, every time Dad ate or drank something, he aspirated some of it. So it wasn't just regular pneumonia he was battling, it was also aspiration pneumonia, where food and drink was going into his lungs every time he did anything. So, in order to help his body heal, because, the main thing you need is rest, but you also need nutrition for your body to heal. And he wasn't able to get it, so Dad made the decision to have a peg tube put in, a feeding tube. Luckily that went perfectly fine, no issues. They got it in, and they were able to start giving his medicines and his food by the feeding tube. Because we knew this wasn't going to be a short-term thing. It was definitely, it was going to be a long-term thing. So having the NG tube go down through the nose, down the esophagus, into the stomach just wasn't an option he wanted to deal with. So the best option was doing the peg tube. And then, he was healing from that and doing okay. And then 2 days later, he started having severe issues with his breathing. It became very slow and shallow. And they were using a CPAP machine. They were doing breathing treatments. They were doing everything they could to get his breathing better. But it kept getting worse. So 2 days after the feeding tube, he made the choice to have a tracheostomy and be put on a ventilator. So within a 10-day period, he not only broke his back and had his whole life demolished in an instant, he also had to undergo 2 more surgeries just so he could be stable and be able to let his body fight to heal. And I was by his side. I would leave for one day so I could go home and get clothes and medicines and pay bills. The first time I left him, my good friend Angie came up to stay with him and be by his side while I took care of what I needed to. And then pretty much after that, anytime I'd need to leave, which was once a week, just so I could go home, get my meds, get clothes and everything like that, then his sister would come and stay overnight with him, grudgingly, but she did it. And that would allow me to come home and take care of what I needed to, but then I'd be back up there, and from the time I left to the time I'd get back, it'd be less than 24 hours because I couldn't stand leaving him alone. I learned how to help suction the mucus out of his nose and throat, out of his trach area. I had his medication list memorized. That way I knew what he needed, how much he needed, and when he needed it. So I was, he couldn't advocate for himself because he couldn't talk anymore. He could only mouth words because he had the trach in for the ventilator. So it was up to me to find out Dad's wishes and follow them through. Because from the moment he fell, everything that happened and that he went through was his own choice, not mine, not anybody else's, but his. He made sure to get all the information possible to make the best informed choice. And he knew without the feeding tube and without the ventilator that he wouldn't survive. So he knew he did these intending that they would be temporary measures because he did not want to be on them permanently. We knew it was going to be a very long battle. And we also knew that there were going to be a lot of setbacks along the way. But we were hopeful that with time and therapy, he would at least be able to be in a wheelchair and move himself around, somewhat take care of himself, it wouldn't be the same as before, but that's what the ultimate goal was to get mobility enough to where he could come home in a wheelchair, but be home. So everything that he did was to further that vision of getting home. After he fell, luckily I was so far ahead in all my classes that all I had were a couple assignments and the finals to take, and that was all. And my teachers were, they were extremely helpful in letting me do what I needed to. And if I turned in something late, that was fine, because Daddy was extremely proud of me for having straight A's. And right before Dad fell, I had been inducted into the Phi Theta Kappa, which is for honor students. And he wanted to make sure that I continued my studies because he was super proud of me. So they worked with me a lot. But Dad was at Lewis Gale for 3 weeks in ICU. And after that 3 weeks, he was transferred to a skilled nursing facility in Lynchburg. And, that was where we went next. That's going to be a story for another day. I'm drained right now. It's painful to relive, and it's painful knowing how much I hated myself and how much I blamed myself. But the one thing I know deep in my heart is if I had not stepped up and stayed with Dad like I did, he would not have survived 3 weeks. He would not have lived as long as he did if it hadn't been for the care that I stepped up and gave. And over the following months, he told me time and again that I was his rock. Even though I was broken inside and crumbling, I didn't let him see that side of me. I only let him see the strong, positive, optimistic me, because it would have been easy for him to slip into a depression, and I would be damned before I'd let that happen. So I am going to say goodnight and continue this story probably tomorrow or the next day. But that'll be my next video. And if you've watched this, I thank you and I appreciate you. And I hope you all have a very blessed night. And y'all have my love. So, good night.